Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I'm John Rest, Chief Correspondent, and with me as always is Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Sport Business News. We are back to wade through the major news stories, deals and trends shaping the global sports business industry. This week, the newsroom will go deep into the commercial model of Padel, and there'll be a whistle-stop tour of the best of the rest of the European football leagues. For Inside the Deal, we're going to take a wider look at Saudi state investment in sport off the back of numerous well-sourced reports, not categorically denied by LIV Golf, that the Saudi Public Investment Fund is looking to pull funding from the Rebel League at year-end. We'll be joined by Matthew Glendinning, European Editor of Sport Business Sponsorship, who was recently on the ground in Riyadh. Plus, we'll have the usual insights and tidbits in any other business. Martin, we're back again. Last week, we were chatting Netflix's live sports strategy, but their start in sport was all about documentaries, and you've been getting your post-Masters golf fix, haven't you?
Yeah, hi, John. I have. So Full Swing came out, well, was it last week? Can't remember, but it was recently. There's only 4 episodes. I found that. I think there was 8 in the first series, maybe 7 in the second. So they seem to be maybe dialing it in to an extent. I mean, given last year, all the different narratives around Rory winning the Masters to the clean sweep, around the Ryder Cup, around LIV, there's no mention yet of, 3 episodes in, but there's been no mention of LIV at all. So fits in maybe with the sort of dwindling appetite for Netflix sports documentaries that we've talked about. But again, I suppose it's such a small part of what Netflix does that if it's not turning the needle to a great extent. What did we learn? Maverick McNeely flies a plane, which is quite apt given he's called Maverick. His dad wears a big cowboy hat at the dinner table. And the rudest clip that they promoted for all the vile abuse at the Ryder Cup was an American fan shouting, "Tommy, get your haircut," which I dare to say there was a lot worse than that.
Yeah, I actually thought they'd scrapped Full Swing. Maybe I'm getting confused with the tennis.
Rugby and tennis scrapped, but no, right. Full Swing. Well, it's like half swing, I think we should call it now.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think the documentary days are. It's very difficult, isn't it, to make something a bit different on the documentary front. Everyone is so samey.
It is, especially with such a time lapse as well. How do you make it interesting when it is to a degree sanitized and it's that far gone after the event? It's a tricky one. Having said that, I still watched it. I'm enjoying the fact that they're not explaining absolutely everything now. The first series, they were like explaining what a birdie was and stuff, and it was tough to watch, even though I wasn't meant to be the audience, clearly. But yeah, I've been doing other stuff apart from watching Netflix. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there.
Well, let's go full swing into the newsroom. Martin, in the last few days, you interviewed Gary Davidson, COO of the Saudi-owned sport and entertainment agency 54. Now, we've been looking to explore Padel as a topic for a while. I don't know about you. It seems that I'm inundated with pitches on Padel from marketing people, comms people, but I really haven't read or heard anything of substance as to how well this is being commercialized as a sport versus, the obvious huge success it's enjoying as a participation sport. So I think we're going to give it a bit of a go here and dig into the weeds of it. Now, back in December, I attended the launch of the Hexagon World Series, which is a new look global team event spun out of the annual Hexagon Cup, which has been going for a couple of years. Now, 54 is the lead investor in the Hexagon World Series. They're also being tasked with commercializing the tournament. Talk us through that interview, Martin. What did Gary have to say, and why do you think now is the right time to be diving into this?
Yeah, you're right. We've had various newsroom discussion about Padel, how we square off the participation phenomenon versus the commercial growth. So, yeah, I thought this was a good opportunity. I went to interview them. Gary Davidson, CEO obviously of 54, which as you say, Saudi-owned by Sanabil, which is itself owned by PIF. And obviously I was representing Sport Business, big international company. So where did we meet? We met in Stirling in Scotland, as you would, because he's based in St Andrews. I'm in Glasgow, so it's kind of halfway. So we met near the castle. Yes, it was very Scottish. I had a short red and a cup of tea and did an interview with him. Nice guy, knows his onions. Not a Padel term, but he did know his onions. So, yeah, I mean, we took the opportunity, really. It was because I did some digging and found out that their investment was £2 million for 8% of the equity. There's another investment round coming up for Hexagon World Series. So it just got me thinking as to, well, for that, what's your ROI or what's the potential for investing in that? There's a feature we will do on sportbusiness.com on the specifics of their investment in the Hexagon World Series and how they think they'll get an ROI. But the very fact that they were investing, and others, is the fact that it has been under-commercialized, because so there is an opportunity there. Elements of it are moving faster than others. We'll get into that. We can maybe unpick some of the areas it's growing and some of the areas it's not growing bluntly. And spoiler, TV rights is that one. So, I mean, their model, without going too deep, is kind of indicative of where Padel is. By that, it's sponsorship revenues, it's event hosting, and a lot of interest among local governments, tourism bodies, and investors to come in and get the license to host and to pay to host. An offshoot of that would be ticketing revenues at events because they're getting bigger audiences. Then also franchise sales at media rights, less so. On the franchise sales side, so they will be able to sell the Hexagon Cup teams that haven't been sold yet, which I think is one, and then also the additional ones that they plan to add in future years. But just to pick up on that initially, John, because I know you've covered and looked at Pro Padel League a bit, valuations for that coming in at approaching 8 figures actually in dollars. So that is a big area of growth, partly driven by celebrity, but also an opportunity.
Yeah, we talked about before, haven't we, when we a slightly different level now, SailGP, but it's that low barrier point of entry really for investors. Pro Padel League, as you mentioned, is probably the US essentially based. They've got 10 teams, mainly in the US. I think they've got the odd one in Mexico and Canada. They are really the market leader when you look at kind of the commercial powerhouse of Padel. Last month only, they closed a $15 million funding round, which was led by the co-chairman of the Charlotte Hornets. Last year, around about this time last year, they got about $10 million in seed funding. So that's the league itself. That's going to be used to kind of, team infrastructure, more events, growing the league essentially throughout North America. But the model, as you say, has been franchise sales. So last September, the LA team, LA Beat, I think they're called, they sold for $10 million. Pretty huge sum for a sport that's still very much kind of, on its growth strategy. And then a month before that, Frances Tiafoe, the tennis player, invested in the New York franchise as well. Obviously, I'm not sure. I don't think the numbers were ever made public, the extent of his investment, but very much that kind of celebrity angle or kind of professional sports star being at the front and center of these investments. As I say, it's a low point of entry. The ROI, I think, is though still to be tested. As you mentioned, there is no obvious kind of media rights revenue coming out of this, is there?
No, there's not. But certainly there are signs of growth in the different commercial areas. And as you say, it's untapped. And that was one of the things I spoke to Gary about and that he really, wanted to go quite big on. So this is what he said with regards to that.
I think it's looking at how under-commercialised it is at the moment. So depending on what sports you compare it to, tennis and golf are obviously global tier 1 sports, incredibly well established. But the professional aspect of those overall industries are sort of between a 10 to 12% of the overall industry. In Padel, it's more like 4%.
Yeah.
It's obviously a smaller industry, but even as a percentage of that industry, professional Padel significantly under indexes. So we think there's kind of 2 things that can happen. One is the industry gets bigger, and that should naturally happen as more people play and as courts become more available and as it becomes more mainstream. But the second part of it is, can professional Padel, even if it retains a small percentage, but the industry gets bigger, great. But we actually think there's an opportunity for it to take a bigger percentage of that overall industry value. And that comes through it being accessible, it being compelling when people tune in, it being compelling when people turn up. I think the consistency of the events and the event experience is important. So all of those things we think are big opportunities.
So growth overall, bigger picture growth, certainly targeted by 54 and by anybody investing in Padel. But where's the sector growth coming from? I mean, if we look at Premier Padel, certainly speaking to them and understanding where they are, sponsorship has been a lot of traction recently. And also, as I said, event hosting at the top. As a very side point, they will be looking to get into betting soon, I think. They're just when the legislation passes, so they can derive some revenue from there. Media rights a struggle. But examples of sponsorships, I think Alpine, the $200,000 a year title sponsorship of the Paris event. The Red Bull and Qatar Airways are the big ones, I suppose, for Premier Padel. Very difficult to unpick. So the Red Bull ones was announced as tens of millions, yet it also includes global media rights. It includes production. So kind of hard to put the finger on exactly the value there. And again, Qatar Airways, massive brand, but I suppose you have the Qatar-backed investment in Premier Padel and the interest there. But that's not to say that there aren't big brands getting on board. There really are. Heineken 0.0's come on board, Whoop. So all the big names that we see associated with premium properties are looking at Padel. They have a watchmaker deal coming very soon. They've been in negotiations with luxury watchmakers. And this is all despite the fact that I suppose, and I mean across Padel, not just Premier Padel, but there is a feeling that some of Padel's not really been packaged right yet. I almost equate it to old days of, or even very recent days of Davis Cup, when you would watch and you would see different players wearing different kits. You will see Padel, when two players in a team win an event, you often see them lifting a trophy with completely contrasting logos on their shirt. So there's a feeling, certainly among 54, that their investment in Hexagon World Series, they can start to develop that team inventory. I think Premier Padel will also look to do that in any kind of additional concepts they are looking at the moment for their events and in series. Gary made an interesting point. He said player endorsements have generally across the board gone up 50% in value over recent times. And he actually said the time to launch this was 18 months ago in many ways, that they've kind of missed that the big pit of that growth, if you like. Arturo Coelho, who's the men's world number one, recently did a deal with Rolex, which I thought was pretty significant. He's represented by WME Sports. Rolex's first endorsement deal in Padel. Why did they do it? Because they felt they are beginning to tap into global market. And we'll come on to this, but Padel is so dominated by Spain and Argentina. A lot of that growth is directly linked to the social growth as well. Coelho has about 770,000 followers on Instagram. They're starting to get into seven figures, the Padel stars, but they're also at that kind of intersection of tennis, golf, F1, who are investors, stars of which are investors in teams, and they can then cross-promote. And that's where a lot of the value comes sponsorship-wise. If you look at it through the old lens of, sponsoring an event that is shown on TV in inverted commas, not so much, because TV's a struggle with Padel. That's the value. That's the potential. The big problem, I suppose, for Padel is its success in two markets and its history in two markets, Spain and Argentina. I may have previewed this to you already, but how many of the men's top 100 come from Spain or Argentina?
Oh, wow. 58.
82.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That is crazy. And also that's not going to be good in terms of, and maybe we'll talk a little bit later on about Olympic aspirations when you've got that concentration.
Yeah. And that's the challenge that any Padel rights holder has now, is to develop local heroes. I mean, there are, we'll have a quick quiz, but there are 7 other countries in the top 100. I'll let you try and name a couple.
Italy?
Yes.
Oh my God, now you're testing me. Brazil?
Italy and Brazil, yeah. Well, let's leave it there because you got them both right. UAE, Chile, Paraguay, Portugal, and Belgium are the others. The top Brit, 166.
It's you, isn't it?
It's not me. No, it's not Ed Malaburn of IMG. It is Christian Medina Murphy, who sounds like a kind of merger of Christian Seifert, Alfonso Medina, and Patrick Murphy. Maybe it is. I mean, what a set of attributes you have there. You could do some amount of rights deals. He's on 166. So that's the problem. And that's why in the business plan for Hexagon World Series 54 have put media rights in at between 12 and 14%. So they feel they've de-risked that. That even to me, don't know, maybe perhaps is a bit high. So I asked Gary about that kind of media rights trajectory. I mean, to my knowledge, a top Padel deal will be mid 6 figures a year for maybe a Spain. That absolute premium. Premier Padel, I think, is getting, rights fees in other territories, albeit it's complicated by the fact that Red Bull has global rights. So kind of a bit difficult there. But in terms of that media rights, flatlining, if you like, or is there growth there? Or are we looking at this the wrong way, in that the barometer of a commercial return on Padel is not sort of minimal media rights values in different territories. It's exposure on digital platforms and socials. So I thought his answer was quite telling, and here's what he said.
Our business plan isn't built on, frankly, needing more than that through the media rights. We really like that. I think if we were sitting here saying for this to be a serious sports investment and business, we need to be commanding tens of millions of media rights the next 4 years. Like, I don't think that's credible. We don't need that because we don't really know what that conversion of the mass participation into viewership looks like. And I think for the sponsors, a lot of it comes down to how are they positioned, what are they positioned alongside, and what does the reach look like? If that's 3 hours of live visibility to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, great. But actually, if it's really cool, engaging, exciting, short-form content to tens of millions of people, there's huge value in that as well.
Good soundbite there from Gary on media distribution, what sponsors look for. Very much a sport for 2026 viral clip. Speaks as well to Premier Padel, which is currently looking at pivoting more towards a free-to-air model and an exposure play, maybe moving it away from some of the pay TV platforms for the very reason that you're not getting, the rights fee growth, and also that issue of not having local heroes. I mean, I couldn't, to be honest, bluntly tell you any paddle heroes in my Scottish paddle heroes or British ones, apart from the one I mentioned. There are according to the latest studies by the International Paddle Federation, FIP, there are 35 million active paddle players across 150 countries. That's playing and very much not watching. But these will all be tapping into social. So maybe that's the way it's going. And also, we've not really talked about attendance point of view, but it is trending in the right direction. If you remember, Premier Padel had an event at Roland Garros. First one was 2022, which had 3,000 people. And then the 2024 event had 16,000. Hexagon Cup was at the Casa Magica, I think sold out record numbers, and people were willing to pay to go to it. That's not even to mention the whole kind of associated spend on merch and then the different industry of spending on. I myself bought a paddle racket, so, there's an example. If I'm buying one, lots of people buying them. And also getting into the US for the first time in London with events there. So all of that kind of fits in quite nicely to whether they could achieve the game changer, which is Olympics inclusion, John.
Yeah, I mean, every sport that isn't on the Olympics wants to be on the Olympics, right? They see the financial benefits of that. As soon as you're in the Olympic program, you've got governments around the world that are putting money into the sport, more courts, and we know how expensive it is to build paddle courts. I think they have got a stated aim, haven't they? The International Paddle Federation, you mentioned FIP, of trying to get in for 2032 in Brisbane. I don't know what the Australian market is like for paddle, but it will be down to the local organisers to suggest some sports to be added to the programme. There was, I believe, about 18 months ago, FIP set up an Olympic project. They brought in an advisor to see what they had to do to get into the games. They've already been in, I think, European Games, Mediterranean Games as well. So they
were in the IMG Summit, big IMG Summit.
That was their big moment, their breakthrough for us anyway.
Yeah, multidiscipline event.
They're in the multi-sport games. I think 36 is the other Olympics. Now, if that is in, Doha are said to be bidding for it. We know India are, but certainly the Middle East has been a big, the governments are spending big on that as a grassroots sport. So you can see potentially 2036 being an opportunity. But, you mentioned that 82 out of the top 100 come from 2 countries. That's just not going to sit with the IOC. They want as broad a geography spread as possible on this. So I think that's going to have to change quite considerably over the next few years. The Pro Paddle League that I mentioned in the US, that's going to be a big market for them. Can they really dominate there? You've got, the likes of pickleball that they always come up against. People compare. I think they're kind of at a different growth strategy to them, certainly globally. So, yeah, I think 32 might be a bit hopeful when you consider what other sports are going to be pushing for that. Cricket, obviously, being in Brisbane, probably surfing as well, maybe. 36 is what they've got their eye on, and they've got a kind of longer runway then.
Yeah, I spoke to a leading figure in paddle who described 32 as an outside chance. Could you imagine 36 in Doha, Joan and Mina on beIN Sports at a lovely glitzy court in Doha? It kind of would feel quite appropriate given Qatar's huge move into the space about 4 or 5 years ago when they wrestled with World Paddle Tour and Estrella Dam. So let's see. So yeah, that's what's been keeping me busy. John, I say, although to be fair, I think I've written one of the stories you might mention, but it's been a busy old week for media rights in European football leagues, hasn't it?
It is, yeah. I'm going to quickly talk through three of them. So you get to pick, Martin. Where do you want to go? Portugal? Do you want to go to Belgium? Or do you want to go to Norway?
Let's go Belgium.
Okay. So, yeah, this is actually the story you wrote.
That's why I said it.
We talked, I briefly mentioned, last week about potential legal case surrounding the changing of the playoffs. And we mentioned then that, there's been some uncertainty, should we say, around the broadcasting of the Belgian league going forward. But actually this week, the Pro League, Jupiler Pro League, will stay on DAZN for the 26-27 season. There had been talk that DAZN were perhaps trying to get out of that contract because of issues around carriage. The original agreement is 25-6 to 29-30, so it's still got plenty of years to run. As I say, at the end of last year, it was communicated that DAZN would continue to broadcast the league until the end of this season, but lawyers revealed they will also now commit to 26-27. So some kind of security there for clubs in the Belgian league as they kind of continue to try and broaden how these games are shown by doing some deals with the telcos. So that's Belgium, I think, ticked off. We're going to put all the links to these stories in the podcast blurb anyway, so there's plenty to kind of read over. Let's take you now quickly to a good news story in Norway. A rare story, actually, and I think maybe we'll look at diving into this a bit deeper in a future pod. Certainly, Sport Business Media team will be looking into this one, where there was over a 9% uplift in annual media rights fees in Norwegian football, which, when you consider the struggles that, certainly in Europe, that national football leagues are facing on their domestic rights, this is a bit of a win. So the new deal is 29 to 34. TV2 is going to remain as the kind of main broadcaster, but they've kind of teamed up with a media company called Amedia, has a streaming platform and owns a number of regional newspapers. In Norway, there's going to be a little bit of national team football for Schibsted, another media group. So those deals will run 29 to 34. It's going to be worth around, I think it was, Norwegian kroner, 820 million a year. So that's pushing 75 million euros a year. So pretty decent return there in Norway. More to come on that, I'm sure. And then taking you back down a bit warmer to Portugal, where last Friday, plans for the centralised sale of broadcast rights in the Primeira Liga were backed by an overwhelming majority of clubs. Can you guess, Martin, which club voted no?
I believe it was the Eagles, the Red Eagles they're called.
Indeed. Benfica, who have been the vocal critic of centralisation plans, voted against in the vote, and Nacional were abstained from the vote. But obviously, we've talked before, Benfica have got a big deal themselves. They think that centralisation, perhaps as it is written, isn't the right way to go. So, yeah, more to watch there. But it seems that this story that probably has been going on for about 6 years now is finally coming to a position where they'll be going to market. That will be from 28-29.
Great. Thank you, John. They will be dancing in the streets of Stavanger, as Bill McLaren famously never said. We will be back shortly and be going deep into news around PIF, LIV and Saudi Arabian investment.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Right, now let's go inside the deal. And the deal itself is quite a broad one this week, Martin. It is that PIF LIV deal, but more broadly, we'll look at Saudi investment in sport as a whole. But I guess starting with the big news that's kind of dominated the airways in the last week or so is PIF leaving LIV?
It's devastating news. I just got my range goats tattoo. I mean, we wanted to go there, as it were, with this story, but certainly broaden it out. We will talk a little bit about Saudi funding and how viewing it as one source, I think, is inaccurate and too simplistic. I think my initial thoughts would be that the slowdown has been coming. If you look at sound bites from Public Investment Fund about reduced spend, about domestic focus, that has all kind of been crystallised in this 2026 to 2030 strategy document in which there's no mention of sports. If we go back, this went under the radar a little bit in October 2024 when Yasser Al-Rumayyan once played golf next to Callum McCarthy, actually, in a golf simulator. But anyway, LIV Golf chairman, PIF director, he said that international investments would reduce from 30% to between 18 and 20%. They sort of refocused to boost the domestic economy. Of course, some of these international investments do boost the domestic economy themselves. And then the war has expedited the whole thing. I suppose big number-wise, yeah, clearly, look, we've talked on a previous podcast about the numbers. The best indication to me of that not having a business model is that it emerged this week that John Rahm's caddy has put his house up for sale for $14 million. So that's where your prize money's going. That is not a sustainable sports property unless you're maybe the NFL. The loss in 2024 of LIV Golf Inc., that's international arm, $462 million, $5 billion spent since 2022 has been a lot of coverage. And then obviously Scott O'Neill's comments previously to the Financial Times that between 5 and 10 years, broad range, they would be profitable. That's not to bash LIV. Everybody's bashing LIV at the moment. There are elements of LIV that have been a big success. And it's not to say that the PGA Tour and DP World Tour have been in perfect shape. They have shaken them up. Golf's needed shaken up. If you look at the hosting fees that were paid in Australia, Hong Kong, that what will be paid in South Africa, these are, big, successful, well-attended tournaments. The sponsorship is now tracking in the right direction, albeit I think we need to take Scott O'Neill to task over his $500 million comment, which is sponsorship revenue, we understand, over multiple, possibly even 5 years. So I'm curious. I know John, you've met Scott in New York. Curious to know how you feel they've managed this in the terms of their response.
Yeah, I did. I met him about 6 months ago. We had a coffee and just chatted kind of informally about the growth of LIV since he'd come on. I think he's an interesting guy in the sense, he's not a golf guy. He doesn't admit it himself. And I think that helped LIV, actually. I think he came in, he changed the commercial model of it and got new sponsors on board and different types of brands, non-Saudi brands. And I think he was kind of keen at the time to say, look, there'd been a lot of war of words in golf and it was time for all parties to kind of coexist, I think there was a place for LIV and the kind of razzmatazz of golf, if you like, and there's the place for a PGA Tour event. So I think the response has been kind of what I expected, which is relatively bullish, but not really saying much if you read between the lines. I mean, the leaked email, the second email that was leaked to staff, no one's actually seen the first email that went to staff.
Indeed.
The second one, which was conveniently leaked to every media outlet, I think, was very much, it's business as usual. But through the end of this year, there was no real mention of anything beyond 2026, as you'd expect. But, telling staff it's tough being a startup, but we're here, we're fighting on. I think there's been a couple of interesting announcements this week that would suggest they think there is a future beyond 26, one of which was the event they've just had in Mexico City, announced straight away that they'll be going back there in 2027. And the other one, I think, was the Oklahoma team, which are going to
mid-season rebrand, which is a bit
right. So they're going to be kind of, locked into Oklahoma as a city. Now, are we going to see more of those? I'm not sure. It's kind of what you'd expect from them to come out and say, everything is fine, but they need to be. Ideally, they need to be looking for new investors. So they're going to be saying everything is fine and dandy.
I mean, these are announcements that would have been pre-planned, and it's typically of LIV to announce a hosting deal during an event. We don't know the details, I suppose, of the Mexico future contract in terms of player participation. I totally agree in that he's been a far less antagonistic figure than Greg Norman. I think he's been a breath of fresh air, has brought that kind of major US sort of broadcast league experience. But right now, I feel like he's a guy scrambling to sort of assuage the fears of business partners. That was telling that he did interviews with TNT Sports, with Fox, with Movistar, 3 incumbent broadcasters. He feels to me like he's talking to prospective investors and trying to defend the product to current partners. Having a go at unnamed sources felt very cheap to me, while at the same time not denying the bigger thrust of the story. Who does he expect is going to, at LIV, come out and talk on the record about PIF investing or not? I mean, that's just crazy. It doesn't make the stories wrong. The most telling quote was in the TNT Sports interview, during which he said, the reality is if you're funded through the season and then you work like crazy to create a business plan to keep going, that's the one that's quite rightly got all the attention. That's the one that was kind of pulled from the video. So who knows? I mean, we could sit here and speculate for an hour about where they'll be next year. Bryson's contract's up. That would be a big domino to fall. Players also have to serve out bans. Interesting to me as to where maybe PIF invest. If they do not continue, I could see them retaining an involvement in golf, be that team golf, be that TGL, be that a team event on PGA Tour Enterprises. They're also, as all of this happening, they're also getting sued as well by Premier Golf League, who claim to have come up with the concept initially. But I kind of wanted to broaden it out into this idea of Saudi money. And there's been reporting on kind of the plug being pulled or the tap being turned off, which feels overly simplistic to me. I mean, let's not underestimate, I suppose, how dramatic this could be with far-reaching consequences for entities that have PIF backing, be it Formula E, be it Newcastle, I suppose, be it WTA. But, they are an investor. There's a time limit on how long they're going to invest. If they feel the tourism impact, the foreign investment impact, grassroots participation, that will, they've benefited from that as much as they can. They're not going to keep throwing money at a wall. And then clearly the war's just made a huge difference. To bring it square into our world, I suppose, SURJ, to me, this posed the questions around where to leave them. By SURJ, we mean SURJ Sports Investment, the Saudi investment entity headed up by Danny Townsend. I suppose on the face of it, there's been a lot of public inactivity getting deals over the line. I look back at last year, we had DAZN in February, Kings League MENA in May, the announcements, Professional Triathletes Organisation in June, and then the ATP event announcement in October. Now, I think we've known for a while that maybe the dynamics of getting deals over the line at SURJ are difficult. Selling that story to a board of, the Saudi board, that it has to be a Saudi story. I give you the example of Pitch International, who we know that they have been in negotiations with about acquiring a sizable stake for 18 months. I think those negotiations started. Don't know if those negotiations are live anymore, but that's a classic one of how is that a Saudi story? It's an investment in a successful sports marketing agency with no obvious kind of track record to me, and maybe Qatar more so than Saudi. So, but yet they still have been busy. Understand that they're looking at putting more investment into PTO. And I did put this to them and asked them how this situation affects them and why there has been an apparent, from the outside at least, maybe slowdown. And here's what they told me. So they said that their approach has always been deliberate and long-term, and mandate is to invest in global sports IP that deliver clear local benefit, strengthening the Saudi sports ecosystem through growth, participation, talent development, long-term capability. So they mentioned the list of portfolio events that they have, which I've said, and they also remain disciplined in how and when we deploy capital, ensures every investment aligns with their localization and impact objectives, wider tourism and entertainment ambitions, create value, not just near-time activity. So there you go. They will be an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of how much more they invest into the industry, given the changing dynamics at PIF, for sure. And I suppose the only other point I would make, I've gone on a bit of a rant here, John, I apologize. A bit of a Saudi rant. The PIF portfolio, and I'd be curious as to your thoughts of the bigger picture, but PIF portfolio, I suppose, doesn't represent the whole of the Saudi sports industry. You could maybe pick up on SPL and privatization. And as a final point from me, I look at the World Cup investment, I look at General Entertainment Authority, which is boxing, Ministry of Sport, and the Sports City. Yeah, all of these are kind of being affected in some way or another, but they're different budgets with different protections. So let's, I suppose, not see the LIV story as this is the end of Saudi money, but at the same time, let's not underplay how potentially seismically significant this is.
No, I agree. I think there's been some kind of one-size-fits-all reporting this week that isn't quite right, as you rightly state. I think there's different ways that they're using their money in sport. If you look at something, well, we're not having it this year by the looks of it, the F1 Grand Prix, but that is, a big hosting fee, but that is something where they get to show off, and that was something I think that would stay. You mentioned the Saudi General Entertainment Authority, the work they've done in boxing in particular. They've got the Zuffa boxing involvement. That's kind of like a property that, in a way, they can own, and I think that kind of thing will stay. Newcastle perhaps is, trying to run a Premier League football club is difficult given the restrictions on spending. You've seen that this year with Newcastle. How long will that play out as a project?
Be a big appetite for other investors in Newcastle, though, I imagine, unlike 100%, some of the other properties.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you will have plenty of people lining up to buy a Premier League club of that stature. You mentioned there the story that we wrote back in October 2004 about when PIF first came out with the numbers.
2024.
So 2024, my apologies, yeah. But since then, there has been a move to privatize SPL clubs. Just last week, Al Hilal was sold to a publicly listed Saudi holding company, Kingdom. So that has been sold by PIF, who had been a major shareholder in Al Hilal since, I think, 2023. And that at the time, there was a plan for the big four, Al Hilal, Al Nasir, Al Ittihad, and Al Eid, to all be privatized. Now, at the time, there was a bit of skepticism because the privatisation actually meant PIF bought 75% of each of them. But the plan is now to kind of sell them off. We've seen that now with Al Hilal. Other deals are likely to follow in the next few months. Last year, there was an even bigger deal, if you like, in the sense that Al Khaloud, which is a smaller club, was sold, wholly owned now by a foreign entity, an American group called Harburg. So there are plans for PIF to kind of move some of their ownership out of these clubs. But this isn't really part, people try to link this in with LIV. This was something that's been in the pipeline for a good 18 months or so. So I think there's very different strategies that they've got. What is that sports spending for? How much of it is for entertainment? How much of it is, World Cup related infrastructure? And everyone's kind of bundling it into this Saudi vision. So I think it's very difficult to say, well, this is one and done. I think it's very much taking, how much have they spent on LIV? Is it 5 billion, Martin? 6 billion by the end of this year? And where's the return? I think that's the issue. It's not just that.
It's in John Ram's caddy's pocket. That's where it is.
Well, exactly. He's got himself is he downsizing? Maybe that's why he's selling up.
Who knows? But I enjoyed the pipeline pun. Thank you for that, John.
You're welcome.
Bring Matthew Glendinning onto the pod, who's had boots on the ground, which might be the wrong phrase given what's going on at the moment. Maybe golf shoes on the ground in Riyadh. Matthew, you were over there. Tell us about it.
My smart training shoes on the ground, I like to think, Martin. We're on the ground in Riyadh.
Tell us about Riyadh. Tell us about the appetite for golf and the feeling you had.
I've been to Cairo. I've never been to Dubai, but I felt it was like Dubai meets Cairo. Had that sort of chaos of Cairo, but also a lot of high-rise buildings. I enjoyed it. It felt like a real place. It wasn't like a kind of cosmetic place that had just been built in the desert because there's loads of money. Real culture, old culture, and they have proper football teams. There's a football stadium just outside the hotel, which is well attended. And the golf culture, you think, must have been grafted on. I remember I went to Doha in the early 2000s and thought, why does Qatar have a golf federation? It's puzzling to people when you see a sort of desert landscape. But they're really into their golf. I mean, the people we met were obviously into their golf because that was kind of what they were trying to show us. But they have reasons for being into golf, which perhaps at first sight you don't think of. One is tourism. So we went to see a Red Sea resort and they built about 11 hotels. And around those 11 hotels, there was a perfectly manicured golf course, absolutely beautiful by the Red Sea. As well as the tourism industry, I thought there was something really interesting that they were talking to me about business culture. I felt that the kind of Saudis wanted to replicate US business culture. So they felt that if you're inviting executives over to Riyadh or in Saudi, that you want to be able to offer a game of golf. And if you want to develop a new residential area, which is, very high end and looks like a very upmarket American suburb, you've got to have a golf course in it. And of course, a lot of people who take some of the top jobs in Saudi are Westerners. So there was that sort of aspect, that sort of practical aspect. But then there's also the sort of sports development aspect. They think golf is a sport that kind of suits their culture. I think it very much suits their desire to have more women playing sport. And I guess it's a sport that you can play somewhat covered up. They never talked about that, but it's kind of a bit of an assumption. So it's kind of got a social progress sort of dimension as well. And that's very much driven by Saudi golf. So you've got all these kind of drivers, if you like, of why golf and Saudi, against all kind of geographical expectations, would be a good fit.
Yeah, it's very useful to put it into that context, given that some observers look at this as just Saudi's backing of LIV, aka golf, when it's so much more than that at a professional level. It's obviously the Ladies European Tour and the PIF involvement, obviously Aramco, which is state-owned, in which PIF holds a stake. Their backing of events, which has been a big thing for them, and also means of, I believe, PIF advertising as a kind of front-facing brand. I suppose everything that's happening now, we may see that now start to fade. But other Saudi sponsorships could remain.
I don't know. I think that front-facing thing is kind of interesting, because when you think about PIF, I'd always thought that they were kind of sponsoring these sports because they wanted to buy these sports in one way or another. And often they are sponsoring sports so they want to be some part of the ecosystem. Even the Golf Saudi guy told me they don't want to buy a tour, so they don't want to buy, say, the Ladies European Tour, but they do want to be in the commercial ecosystem somehow. So going back to this idea that they sponsor to get their foot in the door, to know the executives, and then they maybe make some kind of joint deal, or they buy. It's not really necessarily about that. It's about being a brand that other investors and executives of big private companies can jointly invest with. So when PIF wants to invest in somewhere, use the Sovereign Wealth Fund wherever they choose, a lot of it is in developing industries in Saudi, that the people who will invest with them can trust them and see that they have some values that they share. And I think this kind of shared values that you can create through sport allows PIF to make connection with companies that you might not necessarily think they would. There was electric vehicles, for example, is one. They're now a Saudi electric vehicle brand. I'm not quite sure how closely PIF are involved in that. They're developing all kinds of sectors, and the more they can partner with people, the better. And you only really want to partner with someone if you kind of know who they are, what they stand for. And they really try and, represent best practice in corporate values. That's what they say.
If I was to quickly put you on the spot, 5 years' time, you're back in Riyadh, or even just observing, I suppose, general Saudi sponsorship backing of sport, be that through whichever entity it may be, you still see as clearly a big major economy maintaining a significant interest.
Well, yeah, there's PIF, the sponsor brand, and there's PIF, the investor. PIF, I think, will continue to sponsor sports so that people know what the brand means. It's investing billions and it needs co-investment. They don't want to be just single partners. So in that respect, I think they will, but maybe be a bit more selective about what they choose.
Thank you, Matthew, for those insights from your time on the ground there. It's good to get that context in there into the wider picture. We'll be right back with Any Other Business and a look at the week ahead.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
John, we have served up a paddle feast and a Saudi deep dive. Now for something completely different, as they say. What are you looking ahead to?
Well, it's the London Marathon this week, Martin. Not that I'm running it.
Are you
Never
competing?
have. No, never have, never will. Well, my stat is that last year, the 2025 London Marathon, they had 56,000 people took part, and 55,000, I think, a little over 55,650 finished, which is a record. I would have been in the 40 or so that didn't finish. They're expecting 59,000 this year. They had 1.13 million ballot applications, which is a world record for a marathon. And do you know who's running it this year?
Royalty?
No, we've actually mentioned it in a previous podcast around Netflix programming.
Is it the Proclaimers?
It's Daddy Pig from Peppa Pig.
Oh, Daddy! Oh, wow!
So he's running it to raise awareness. Well, I don't know who's going to be. No, that's the big guess. Who's going to be in the costume? But it's to raise awareness. But there's actually going to be a special upcoming episode of Peppa Pig with Daddy Pig running the London Marathon. So
I hope he's got his little car with him.
Well, you might need it. Keep your eyes peeled for him and whoever it might be. There's some wild rumours going around who it may be. I'm sure on Monday or maybe Tuesday, when the legs have stopped seizing up, there'll be lots of LinkedIn posts about people that have done them in this industry. So good luck to all those in the sports industry that are running the London Marathon. I won't be watching it because I'll be watching my sons playing football in a park somewhere. But
yes,
good luck.
Good, impressive. I've got so much energy that I will probably struggle to even get up to watch it. So there we go. But congratulations to everybody running it. Just to finish, and on any other business point of view, I want to go back to one of my favourite topics, which is the enhanced games. John, as you know, I'm an enhanced kind of guy. So the Killers are playing Champions League halftime show, and also, more importantly, playing the closing event ceremony at the Enhanced Games next month in Las Vegas.
What a signing. We
certainly wouldn't make a joke about having the Killers backing an event that encourages safe taking of drugs or enhancements. We're certainly not going to make that comparison, but I would like to perhaps speculate as to what might be on the set list. Any guesses as to what they might be singing?
It's your question. Let you go first. I don't want to steal your best one.
Well, actually, I'm going to steal Ben Cronin's best one, who came up with Are We Human, open brackets, growth hormone, close brackets.
Well, that's a good one.
I was going strong.
I've got a couple. All these drugs that I've done. Are we allowed that one?
All these enhancements, I think, that you've done.
And the other one I had was Somebody Sold Me. rather than somebody told me.
Clever.
Yeah.
I had
That's it, I'm out.
I had somebody told me it was a WADA approved product. I think
That's
that might be
probably
what they
more
close
allowed.
in.
There we are.
There's actually been a couple of reports in the press about them not having any sponsors, which obviously we wrote about a few months ago, and overlooking the famous cactus water sponsorship, which we all know about. But no other sponsorships announced since. Let's see. A few weeks to go. Better get them done.
Good luck.
John, any other business?
No, Martin, I think we are done. That brings us to a close. Thank you, Martin,
Excellent.
and also to
A marathon
Matthew
episode.
Yeah, well, exactly. It will be a long one. Thank you, Martin and Matthew, for joining us. As always, for the most accurate rights feeds across media and sponsorship and all your daily news needs, head to sportbusiness.com, and we'll be back with another episode next week.